From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics here with a Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'm in the Madison office with my colleague Abigail Levins to talk about an interview she did with U.S. Senator Ron Johnson this week. So, Abigail, what are some of the things that you guys talked about during the interview?
Sure. Ron Johnson and I talked a lot about news happening on Capitol Hill right now. We talked about his concerns with Trump's tariffs and how they'll raise costs for Wisconsin families. But he also praised Trump and Musk's cost-cutting efforts through DOGE and discussed more ways he hopes to cut costs in the federal government.
All right, let's hear more of what he had to say.
Well, thank you for agreeing to join me on the podcast. I just have a couple questions for you about how you're feeling about this session so far, and I thought we'd start off with news of the day. I know a big thing today is that Trump is announcing tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and probably a lot of your constituents and Wisconsin residents are wondering how this will impact them. What do you think is the perceived impact on the Wisconsin economy of this announcement?
Well, I've been asked to comment on this, and what I've been saying is I'm concerned. I'm concerned about retaliation against Wisconsin manufacturers, against builders, against farmers. I'm concerned about the potential inflationary impact of that, although that is there's nothing simple about that calculation. So I'm just overall concerned. I do realize that President Trump, I think, very effectively used tariffs to, for example, secure the border with Mexico when Mexico wasn't complying with or helping out with Remain in Mexico policy. He threatened tariffs and got the cooperation to secure the border. And I do know the White House, in explaining this round of tariffs, is pointing almost exclusively to the flow of fentanyl, particularly out of Mexico. I'm not sure exactly what they want both Mexico and Canada to do before they would consider lifting those tariffs. I'm hoping that Mexico and Canada do what President Trump, first of all, it'd be good to try and reduce the flow of fentanyl, which is killing tens of thousands of Americans a year. So, understand the goals, but put me down as concerned. I think I share what we're seeing in the financial markets as well. They're obviously concerned about disruption supply chains. So I'm making my concerns very well known to the administration.
Sure. And also in recent news, the Senate voted last night on a bill that would take transgender women out of women's sports. Tell me about your vote on that bill and why you think that was an important discussion.
Well, I think most Americans realize how grotesquely unfair it is to have our women and girls competing against biological males. In many cases, dangerous to be competing against biological males, but certainly unfair. And then those same biological males forcing themselves inside women and girls' private spaces, bathrooms, locker rooms, showers. Again, it's absurd that we've gotten to this point in our society where people would not only expect to do that, but frame their political ideology around something that is really harming women's ability to enjoy competitive sports so I obviously voted yes for Coach Tuberville's bill along those lines. I was very disappointed that Democrats, we didn't have enough to join us to actually turn that into law. Good thing we elected President Trump, who's doing it by executive order.
Sure. And another big topic, speaking of President Trump, that's been on people's minds is the funding cuts or the spending cuts by the Department of Government Efficiency. And I know that's been a platform of yours for a long time. You talk about wanting to reduce the deficit and wanting to cut government spending. How are you feeling about DOGE's efforts so far?
Well, let me ask a couple questions as I asked my Republican colleagues at lunch. Said, first of all, does anybody think we spent too little in 2019? Certainly from Republicans, we've been saying as long as I've been here, we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. The government spends too much. So 2019, I think we're probably spending too much. Not in all areas, but generally just too much. We spent $4.4 trillion in 2019. The next question is, does anybody think it's unfair if you take a certain spending level and increased it based on the growth in population and inflation? If you were satisfied with the original spending level, wouldn't you be satisfied with the next spending level? And people don't disagree with that. Then I point out the fact that even though we spent $4.4 trillion in 2019, this year we'll spend about $7.3 trillion. If you adjust 2019 spending the way I just suggested and use this year's Social Security and Medicare and interest, spend what we're going to spend in 2015, but all other spending increased by population growth and inflation, that level would be $6.5 trillion. So we are spending grotesquely over that reasonable pre-pandemic level. We need to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending. Now, one of the main complaints against Elon Musk and his Doge effort is these are unelected people. Well, first of all, no, they're being asked by the duly elected president to go inside these agencies. The people, the bureaucrats in these agencies are unelected and unaccountable. They don't want to be held accountable. We're trying to hold them accountable. We're trying to expose, and we are exposing, grotesque levels of waste, fraud, and abuse. It ought to outrage every American. The questions that haven't been asked, the controls that haven't been in place as the federal government is mortgaging our children's future. So I think it's almost indisputable that Elon Musk is probably one of the most brilliant, accomplished, and effective human beings ever to walk the face of the earth. I'm just very glad that he's putting his genius and he's attracted a bunch of other incredibly smart and energetic people. I'm being told it's a 24 hour, 7-day-a-week effort to uncover waste, fraud, and abuse that, again, should outrage every American. So I'm fully supportive of his effort. Now, the trick is going to be to codify that. They're exposing it. They can delay the implementation. The president may win in court his ability to impound funds, but if he loses in court, the only way those savings are realized is if we are able to enact that either through a reconciliation process on mandatory spending or with help of hopefully 7 Democrats in the Senate who are equally outraged by the waste, fraud, and abuse that Elon Musk is uncovering.
Sure. I was going to ask you if there's anything in particular you think is going to be next steps. Like Elon Musk is making these cuts. Is there anything top of mind that you think this is going to be the next thing that you're going to want to do or you want Republicans to do to cut spending?
Well, I need to convince my colleagues just what I talked about, that taking 2019, except for Social Security and Medicare, those are exempt. Interest is what it is. But take 2019 spending levels and increase them by the growth of population inflation from 4.4 trillion up to 6.5 trillion is what the number would be, is a reasonable baseline to start from. A lot of Republicans talking about zero-based budgeting. Well, I'd love to go back to zero-based budgeting, but that's not, government is way too dysfunctional to expect us to do that. But why don't we go back to a $6.5 trillion baseline? By the way, I've laid out other options where you can go back to 1998 under Bill Clinton. You adjust that the same way, you're at 5.5 trillion. You go back to 2014 Obama, increase that by inflation and population growth, that's 6.2 trillion. The Senate budget actually picked a different option. Trump's own budget, his projection for 2025 is on his last budget that he proposed, that'd be $6 trillion, $61 billion. That is the Senate budget. So again, that to me, that's a reasonable baseline to start the budget for next year.
Sure. Another big discussion nationally has been around town halls that Republicans are holding. Do you feel a lot of talk is about protest, about Doge and Elon Musk? Do you feel like that's been true of your constituents, or how have you been feeling your town halls have been going? I know you held a big one over telephone last week. Do you feel that went well, that you were able to have good conversations with constituents?
Well, first of all, I think it's unfortunate that Democrat elected officials are telling their constituents, their supporters, to take to the streets. And so I am concerned about potential violence against my state staff, but I obviously want to hear what our constituents have to have on their minds. So what I'm doing is holding telephone town halls, which quite honestly open it up to vastly larger number of constituents that can participate and can hear. And so we'll just redouble and triple our efforts in terms of telephone town halls again, so that I can hear what is on constituents' minds. And the beauty about the telephone town halls, I think we are 100 and can't remember, we're well over 100. More than 7 people we've called out to, more than 1 million participants. A lot of questions I've answered in my time here. It's extremely important, but they've always been respectful. We take questions. The last telephone town hall, again, I think was populated with a lot of people that don't agree with me, which is fine. I'm happy to demonstrate how you can disagree agreeably. And the wonderful thing about Wisconsin is we're just nice people, right? We're pretty polite. And so our telephone town halls have been very respectful, even though we've had people who strongly disagree with my position on things. So that's fine. I mean, I'm not saying I have a corner on everything that's right and everything that's true. So it's a very effective dialogue, and I do encourage people. You can go to our website and you can sign up to be called for the telephone town halls. So you get called on every last one of them.
Sure. And you mentioned that Democrats are telling people to take to the streets, telling people to protest at these things. When you were elected, there was a movement, the Tea Party movement of 2010, back when Republicans were doing this. They were protesting. Does it feel similar to that, or does it feel different for you?
No, I mean, the Tea Party movement, and I would even say the Trump movement, is populated by people who, first of all, love this country. They respect law enforcement. They would never even consider breaking a law. Certainly not engaged in violence or vandalism. I mean, I think the hallmark of the Tea Party rallies is there was no garbage left on the ground after them. So it's a different type of, that we were making our voices heard, but very respectfully, always following the law, no physical violence, no property damage whatsoever. And that's also true of the Trump rallies. It's not so true of BLM, Antifa, the summer of riots in 2020. And again, it does concern me when you've got members of the left telling people to take to the streets, and the type of incendiary rhetoric that you hear out of our Democrat elected officials. Remember Chuck Schumer basically threatening Supreme Court justices.
Sure. One more question on this subject. You mentioned that teletown halls have allowed you to reach more people and more constituents. And also today, the NRCC told Republicans not to hold any more in-person town halls. Are you going to hold any more in person or continue with town halls?
And I am concerned about the safety of everybody that attends those things. So until we feel pretty confident that we don't have to be concerned about safety, I think that the smarter thing to do, and again, the most efficient and effective, if you hold an in-person town hall, you might be lucky to get a couple hundred people there. When we dial out to 80,000 people, and then people can sign up and make sure they're always dialed into, and we have thousands of people on those calls, sometimes in excess of 20,000 people. They can all sit and listen as long as they want to. They all have an opportunity to try and get an answer a question. Obviously, the more people that are on the call, the smaller percentage of the people actually ask a question. But normally what ends up happening is there are topics of the day, and somebody asks a question that somebody else is going to want to anyway. So they're very effective. It's a very effective format for me to understand what's on the constituents' mind and for them to understand exactly what my thinking is on these issues.
Sure. Another question for you about tonight. So I assume you're attending Trump's address tonight. What are you hoping he talks about? Are you looking forward to hearing what he says tonight?
Well, I hope he lays out for the American public the example after example of outrageous waste, fraud, and abuse that's being uncovered by DOJ. I hope he can lay out some positive movement in terms of the Ukraine war that has to come to an end. It sounds like Zelensky has thought better of what happened and is willing to come forward and sign the deal, which I think is brilliant. You're not going to get these, Russia and Ukraine to set aside their hate. I mean, there's just too many war crimes that occurred. But continuing this bloody stalemate is in nobody's best interest. So how do you stop it? Well, if you can figure out a win-win-win situation, deals to mine minerals and rare earth minerals in both the Russian-controlled areas in Ukraine, that's a way to start the process of peace and maintain peace and build on peace. And eventually over time, the hatred diminishes. I mean, but let's face it, we're fighting wars in areas of the world that date back to hatred hundreds of years. So again, what can you do to try and tamp down the hatred to at least return to a state of non-war?
Sure. And I wanted to ask you quickly about the Ukraine. Do you feel a lot of Democrats are criticizing Trump's exchange with Zelensky on Friday? Do you feel that was justified in pursuing peace and pursuing this deal?
I think it's, for the people that are in the room, and I've talked to a number of them, I think it's widely recognized that President Zelensky, unfortunately, behaved very badly. Okay. I mean, it just was not in his best interest. If he had those concerns, best to express behind closed doors, not do it in public. And that blew up in his face. And I think he recognizes it now. I think he regrets it, which is why he's issued a statement to try and get by it and re-enter the peace talks, commit Ukraine to peace. And listen, I have all the sympathy in the world for what he and his country have gone through. The courage he showed in terms of not just bugging out as President Biden wanted him to do within days of the invasion. I don't want to see more Ukrainians die. I don't want to see more of Ukraine get destroyed. I don't want to see Russian conscripts die. So I truly understand how hard it is for people in a war conflict where horrific war crimes have been committed, for them to set aside the hate and be willing to say, okay, we're just going to end this. Not necessarily on the terms I like. I don't really like where the battle lines are drawn. I don't like what territory is still being occupied. But you have to end the war. You have to end the killing. You have to end the destruction. So I realize how hard that is, and I'm very sympathetic. I wish everybody in that room would have been sensitive to that fact, and it wouldn't have happened, but it did. And I'm glad that it sounds like President Zelensky has rethought his position and willing to come forward and say, no, we do want peace, and we recognize, what President Trump is laying out is a smart approach. Look at economics. That's a really good security guarantee. If we've got economic interests in Ukraine, if we got Western contractors doing the mining and that type of thing in both Ukraine and the areas, for example, dominated by Russia, again, try and achieve a win-win-win situation, even with all the hate that's going to linger for decades.
Well, Senator, that's all the questions I have for you today. I appreciate you taking this time to answer my questions.
Well, have a great day. Take care. Stay
You as well.
All right, Abigail, thank you for sharing that interview with us. If our listeners want to hear more about politics in Washington, D.C., they can subscribe to our DC Wrap newsletter. In the meantime, I'm Kate Morton.
And I'm Abigail Evans.
Thanks for tuning in to WIS Politics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.